faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for listening to the Monday edition of Point of View. How was your weekend? I think ours all changed rather dramatically on Saturday night. And as we went off the air on Friday, talking about the fact that there may be an attack by the U.S. in the future, but probably something that would go through Congress, and we were wrong. The 2 weeks that Donald Trump was talking about turned out to be 2 days. And as you well know, this very significant attack on 3 different nuclear facilities in Iran took place over the weekend, as evidenced by the fact that right now, if you are looking at the news, we do have evidence that Iran launched an attack on the U.S. Air Force bases in Al-Udeid, which is one of the many. You got Al-Dafara and a number of others there in Qatar, or Qatar, depending on how you want to pronounce it. This attack comes after the U.S. Embassy there told Americans to shelter in place until further notice. As far as we can determine, the Patriot missile defense, those would be the MIM 104s, actually have been able to beat back that attack. But we do know that the Joint Chief, that would be General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, as well as the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, have been in the Situation Room monitoring the possibility of Iranian retaliation. And so the concern about there being some response from Iran has now been fulfilled. And as far as we know, even though this was an attack because of the Patriot missile defense system and others, that seems to have not done any significant damage, but we'll have more as an update as we go along. Let's, if we can, try to answer a lot of questions I suspect you have. How was this done? Why was it done? What are the implications of it, and the rest? And so we're going to try to work our way through that in the first hour. Our plan has been, and it still is, for us to spend some time with Hal Donaldson, his book, What Really Matters. He was somebody that was recommended by John Kasich. And when we found out his book was available, we thought we'd chat with him as well. So we are, in a sense, dealing with lots of very significant issues. And don't forget that this week we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about the fact that as we come to our fiscal year end, we hope that you will click on that banner which says Anchored to Truth. We have a match on the table, a dollar for dollar match. I'll talk more about that later. I've got a Viewpoints commentary up there. We've got videos, and many of the articles I'm going to be referring to are there. If you find yourself saying, okay, that was a good point, I had not thought about that before, or I'd like to see the documentation for what you're talking about, let's see if we can provide as much of that as possible on the website, pointofview.net. Okay, how was this achieved? A couple of, I should say, B-2 bombers flew 37 hours nonstop in order to hit deep inside Iran on these nuclear sites. These American B-2 Spirit stealth bombers flew actually nearly 37 hours from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, then were able to strike 3 of these very fortified nuclear sites. The president on Saturday night, 10 o'clock Eastern Time, 9 o'clock Central, said that this was a very successful attack. And at least according to the New York Times, the mission required multiple mid-air refueling operations, with the B-2 bombers flying deep into hostile airspace and unleashing, and they talk about 6 of these GBU-57 bunker busters. The total, I've heard 12, I've heard 14, but nevertheless, you can see that the 6 that were unleashed in the Fordo facility was the most significant because this is one that was regarded as perhaps the most impenetrable due to its deep underground construction. And yet Trump declared on Truth Social that it is gone and it was amazing success. There have been some since then that have said maybe we need to wait for a full accounting of that as well. And all of this was part of what is called Midnight Hammer. This is when the Pentagon said these U.S. strikes happened when you had the 14 bunker buster bombs, as well as then about 30 Tomahawk missiles, which were actually launched from the Navy. The operation, because it was called Midnight Hammer, deployed these B-2 stealth bombers from the Air Force Base there in Missouri. Dan Kane, who again is the general and chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, told reporters at a press conference Sunday morning that there were no reports of U.S. forces even coming under fire. Some of that gets down to the deception that was used. Some planes were flown to the west. These came in apparently in a different direction in the east. And so as a result, there was the deception that was involved in that regard. There was also, of course, the deception of Donald Trump saying, well, we're going to give him 2 weeks, and it turned out to be 2 days. And so this set of bombers took off early Saturday U.S. time, later dropped their bunker busters, and as a result left, and some have reported that Iran didn't even know they were hit until after they were gone. Pete Hegseth said this is a plan that took months and weeks of positioning and preparation so that we could be ready when the President of the United States called. It was a great deal of precision. It involved misdirection and the highest of operation security. The official said that the 75 precision guide weapons were used, and the operation was one that used some about 125 aircraft, including those which were deceptive, those which were using for refuel, and the rest. I might just mention that we've on a few occasions talked about the B-2, Spirit, one of the most secretive and lethal aircraft ever built. If you go out on YouTube right now, there's supposedly a video of the cockpit, not of the actual flight, but of a previous one, manufactured by Northrop Grumman, and it is famed for its stealth technology, but also for its ability to deliver just a huge payload, because as we have pointed out before, these bombs are like 30,000 pounds. And so, again, this is what it was actually designed to do, to come in a very stealth way, not be easily observed, certainly by radar and other things, and then be able to drop these precision-guided bombs, 30,000, again, GBU-57AB massive ordnance penetrator bombs, known as bunker buster bombs. And, of course, then you have about 400 miles away in the Gulf. This is where the submarines launched 30 Tomahawk cruise missiles at 2 of the other nuclear sites as well. So that's how it was accomplished. Again, just think about 37 hours in a plane, whether it is a luxury plane or whether it is a strategic plane or military plane. You can imagine what that must have been like, but nevertheless, it is one more illustration as to why you do not want to cross the United States military. We come back, though, lots of response. Should the president have consulted individuals? Turns out, as you'll find out in just a minute, of the so-called Gang of Eight, yes, 4 of them were consulted, Republicans. 4 of them were not. Those would be the Democrats. I think you might know why. And then what kind of reaction and response are we getting from other countries? And then I want to take you to some various pieces from New York Times, National Review, and a variety of others addressing this issue from different perspectives. We'll come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Freedom in this country depends on 3 important foundations: morality, limits, and human rights. First, freedom depends on morality. John Adams observed, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." When the citizens have an internal moral compass, the size and scope of government can be small. There's no need for external laws and regulations from government. If people do what is right and demonstrate common sense, the republic will thrive. Second, freedom also depends on limits. Lord Acton famously explained, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." That is why the framers instituted checks and balances in our constitutional system. They also recognized the rights of citizens to hold government officials accountable. A moral people keep the government in check. A limited government keeps political leaders in check. A third foundation of freedom depends on respecting human rights as granted by our Creator. That important principle is found in the Declaration of Independence, which explains the why of American government. And it is also implied in the Constitution, which explains the how of American government. And this country has not always lived up to those ideals, but they provided a worthy goal to achieve. Although you may know all these foundational principles, I fear that a whole generation of young people do not know them because they were never taught in their civics classes. And I see each of these foundational principles slipping away. If we don't begin to teach these principles to our children and grandchildren, then morality, limited government, and respect for human rights will soon become relics of our past. That is why we need you to teach them to your family today. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Let's, if we can, first of all, quote from the Wall Street Journal. Editors there actually said Trump meets the moment on Iran. The editors say President Trump's decision to strike Iran's three most significant nuclear sites on Saturday helped rid the world of a grave nuclear threat and was a large step towards restoring U.S. deterrence. It also creates an opportunity, they say, for a more peaceful Middle East if nations of the region will seize it. Good if there, but nevertheless, that's the case. A little bit later, they say Mr. Trump gave Iran every chance to resolve this peacefully. The regime flouted its 60-day deadline to make a deal. Then Israel attacked, destroying much of the nuclear program and achieving air superiority and supremacy. And still, the president gave Iran another chance to come to terms. But again, it is very obvious that Ayatollah Ali Khamenei wanted a bomb more than he wanted peace. He goes on to say that the Pentagon on Sunday disclosed more details of the mission, which include a deception and B-2 bombers and deep penetrating bombs only the U.S. can deploy. And they point out the fact that military conflict is sometimes unpredictable, and Iran may retaliate no matter how self-destructive that would be. Of course, Iran is running out of missiles, we might point out, and I think there were, nobody gave me a count on how many were actually launched at Qatar, but nevertheless, didn't seem like it was a massive strike there as well. They go on, and a little bit later, to say at the same time, the Israeli campaign yielded an unrivaled strategic opportunity, which we even talked about on Friday. Suddenly, Iran's airspace was uncontested, and that really is the case right now. Its substantial ballistic missile program was degraded. Several of its proxies have been bludgeoned into silence. Think about what has happened to Hamas, Hezbollah, what even might be happening a little bit right now to the Houthis, and its nuclear program has been reduced to a few key sites. So then they come to this conclusion. We would say that what has been unfolding left Mr. Trump little choice. But then they add a comma, except U.S. presidents always have a choice, and they've been known to kick the can down the road. I found this on X, and maybe you can find it as well, a series of quotes that maybe illustrate how each president's talked about this, but we have been in the same situation since the middle of the 1990s. Here's Bill Clinton, 1995. We are determined to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. Here's George W. Bush in 2006. Iran must not be allowed to develop nuclear weapons, period. Here's Barack Obama, 2015. I have stated that Iran will never be allowed to obtain a nuclear weapon. Here's Joe Biden in 2022. We will not allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon. And then Donald Trump in 2025. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Simple as it can be. One of the things that I might point to is a very interesting YouTube video that I watched recently by Douglas Murray. Now, if you're not familiar, Douglas Murray, kind of left of center from England, but he has always been very strong about the Muslim threat and also has been very strong about the danger of Iran. Matter of fact, if you go to your local bookstore, I would commend one of his books called Democracies and Death Cults, which really kind of gets us into kind of what has happened since October 7th in Israel with Hamas. But nevertheless, in this particular piece, and it looked like from the format he was in either Oxford or Cambridge, I think it was Oxford Debate Society, in which he was making the case that, and this is interesting, this came 12 years ago, saying someone in the future, could be a prime minister, could be a president, will finally destroy Iran's nuclear facilities and nuclear capability. At the time, there will be all sorts of countries that will condemn the action, but privately, they will all breathe a sigh of relief. One of the things I've posted, by the way, is a very good piece of an interview with the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, in which at one point he was asked about that. And he said, look, many of these individuals in these various governments have to, of course, speak out and condemn the president for what he has done. But privately, they're very relieved because of the potential threat of Iran. And I'll get into that a little bit later when I quote from David French in his piece that appeared in the New York Times. But nevertheless, at the very end of this piece by the editors of the Wall Street Journal, they said that credit goes to President Trump for meeting the moment despite the doubts from part of his political base. Because some of the people that have been critical of the president are part of what might be called the MAGA movement. We talked about that on Friday. But it also ended taco. He said that they said the chatter about taco stands for Trump always chickens out, will probably quiet down now, but the more significant reassessment has to be with U.S. foreign policy. And the bottom line is that there were individuals that say we should just simply not ruffle the feathers of Iran. The best we could hope for would be some kind of, as they say, flimsy deal that bribed Iran with billions of dollars, but still left open the path to the bomb, which, of course, is exactly what you had under the Obama administration, under John Kerry and others. And the editors of the Wall Street Journal simply say they were wrong, and the world is safer for it. Let me also just mention something else, and we'll get into some other aspects of this in just a minute, because, again, we have to understand that there will not only be some criticism from individuals who have been supporters of Donald Trump, but there also are the Democrats who are arguing that this is an impeachable offense, which is a little hard to argue for if for no other reason you think of, let's mention Bill Clinton launching missiles into Sudan, Afghanistan. You can think of all sorts of actions that were taken by Barack Obama and others. But nevertheless, we'll see where that goes. But the argument right now has been this. as a Democratic Party, we agree that Iran cannot have nuclear weapons, but we should not have allowed the president to take this action. And the biggest argument they make is we were not consulted. Well, again, every time I bring this up, people say, yes, well, then you're going to have leaks. Yes, you are. And one of the things that was really striking the other night is to have people that have actually covered the Pentagon saying, we have never ever seen something held so tight. You know, this argument that the Defense Department and the Pentagon's in disarray under Pete Hegseth. Well, if you're looking for that argument, you're going to have to look somewhere else because nobody saw this coming. And the mission was kept under wraps for a long period of time. But just before we take a break, let me explain something. We have what is known as the Gang of Eight. You have 4 on the Republican side, 4 on the Democratic side, and these are the leaders. It would be the Speaker of the House, and this would be the Senate Majority Leader, and likewise you would have the House Minority Leader, and then the Senate Minority Leader, and then you would have the other 4 individuals are the individuals who are the chair of those particular committees having to do with intelligence and other aspects of that, armed services and intelligence. And so we now know that indeed President Trump did inform the Republican leadership before the B-2 bombers dropped their payload, but kept the Democrats in the dark. And that comes from Axios. So they were complaining that they weren't briefed in advance, and I think we all pretty much know why. And that is the Republican counterparts were given advance notice. Democrats weren't because of the fear that, and I think it's a very legitimate fear, that they would leak it. Well, we're going to come back and get into some other aspects of this before we go on to other topics, because this isn't the only thing in the news. But as we go to a break, if you'd like to find some of these articles, they're available at the website pointofview.net. And as you go there, let me encourage you to think about clicking on that banner that says Anchored to Truth, Give Now. We have a $56,000 match challenge. It's probably going to go up, but the bottom line is we've got money available. It's already put in the bank, ready to go to match your funds dollar for dollar. I do know that there are a few $1,000s that have been already submitted and matched. But if you want to make sure that your dollars are matched, do it now, because by the end of this week, or certainly by this time next week, which would be the last day of June 30th, if it's not available then, well, it won't be matched. So if you've always said, I appreciate the kind of news, information, commentary, and perspective you have on Point of View, going to ask you even during the break to click on that button that says Give Now. And of course, if you ever want to make a phone call, that's 1-800-347-5151. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Well, I do need to say that we are running out of time to raise funds by June 30th, the deadline that will determine our budget for the next fiscal year. Your gift will make a difference. And thanks to an ongoing matching challenge, your gift will be doubled through the month of June. Here's why Point of View is the media ministry to support as we forge into the future. Point of View is trustworthy, with proven dedication to a biblical worldview for 53 years and counting. Additionally, Point of View is making a multi-generational impact. Your support equips listeners to articulate biblical truth about the issues of our day with their children and even their grandchildren. Americans need a proven resource to equip current and future generations to live out God's truth in our time. Give it to them today by giving at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's be very clear, and that is if you want to follow the Constitution, and that certainly seems to be something that's fallen out of favor, but the Constitution in Article 1, Section 8 says that Congress has the power to declare war, to raise and support armies, and makes rules for the military. But Article 2 also says the president is the commander-in-chief, and that certainly gives him some authority over the armed forces to direct the operations once he's authorized. Now, since then, of course, we've had a War Powers Act in 1973 and a variety of others, and the bottom line is I would like someday for a president, and it's certainly not this president, but it wasn't the last few either, to actually ask for a declaration of war. If you go back to our history, remember Thomas Jefferson wanted to go against the Barbary pirates. He asked for a declaration of war, did not get it, but he got authority to use military force. Later on, you had the second, between that, you had the War of 1812. Well, I think that one was a declaration of war. The one after that, again, when you had James Madison. It was James Madison, architect of the Constitution. He now asked for authority and was not given an opportunity to declare war, but was used that against the Barbary pirates again. What we have working right now is a situation in which, really since 2001, the authorization for the use of military power, and that was given to George W. Bush. And there have been presidents who have said, well, that gives me enough justification to use military force. But it's nothing close to a declaration of war. And if you really want to be honest, the last time we had a true declaration of war from Congress was December 8th, 1941. So we do need to get back to what the Constitution requires. But let's also be honest enough to mention that the two Bush presidents, George Herbert Walker Bush and George W. Bush, father and son, both sought approval from Congress. In one case, even sought approval from the United Nations. And yet they're sometimes being tarred for having some of the greatest misadventures in the Middle East. So even getting approval isn't any justification necessarily, but it's just a reminder of the fact that this is a president right now, Donald Trump, who says, look, if you allowed Barack Obama to do it, if you allowed Joe Biden to do it, I'm going to do it as well. And we've seen that in a number of different policy issues. But if you did not have a chance to hear Donald Trump's speech, it's relatively short, which is uncharacteristic. But there was a statement that was made at one point, and Dan McLaughlin picked up on it. Donald Trump said this: for 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. This was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate in particular. So many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago I would not let this happen. It will not continue. That phrase about roadside bombs, Dan McLaughlin picks up on and said, we have not forgotten. Here's what he said. We have, of course, lost many Americans to Iranian war and terrorism over the past 45 years, including hundreds of U.S. Marine peacekeepers killed by truck bombs in Beirut in 1983. We've talked about that before. But by mentioning roadside bombs, Trump is talking specifically about Iraq. So the bombs go off in Iraq, but they were actually from Iran. And so he goes on to say, had the U.S. faced only Iraqi opposition, the war in Iraq would have been very different. And Iran, having the longest border with Iraq and a border with Afghanistan, was the largest third-party foreign participant. For years, critics of the war downplayed the extent to which U.S. military deaths in Iraq were Iran's doing. To his credit, Trump has not forgotten. So I've posted that because that phrase about roadside bombs It was, I think, mentioned once in one of the commentaries, but I think this was very significant. If you know individuals that have served in Desert Storm or a variety of other outreaches, or even were there in one way or another helping refugees in Iraq, you recognize that the greatest threat sometimes was not just Iraq, but Iran. And when we hear people say, well, Iran is not a threat to us, yes, it is. And it isn't just, of course, the truck bombs in Beirut and a variety of other issues that we've mentioned on this program. It was even these roadside bombs as well. So I thought I might mention that piece by Dan McLaughlin, We Have Not Forgotten, is there. I thought I would also mention that there was a very good interview, probably the best I found so far, with the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, in which he explained some of the background, what was happening behind the scenes. I gave you some in terms of the way in which these B-2 bombers were flying, but also he gives you some of the percentages of uranium enrichment. You're going to see a lot of people making claims, and again, everybody's allowed their own opinion, but they're not allowed their own facts. And again, Marco Rubio takes you through the level of uranium enrichment, which is not necessary if you wanted to have nuclear power. It's necessary for one and only one thing, and that is to create a nuclear bomb, and how close they were in terms of the percentage of uranium enrichment that was taking place. Now, you might say, well, why should I believe him? You've heard the phrase before, Bush lied and people died, and I always said it should have been Colin Powell lied and people died, because if you remember, he's the one that came before the United Nations and made the case for weapons of mass destruction. Did we find any? Not a whole lot. If you want to even consider some of the most bizarre things, weapons of mass destruction. And so in some respects, you might say, well, then why should I believe Marco Rubio? Well, maybe because Marco Rubio, looking at Colin Powell, says, I don't want to repeat that error, number one. And number two, I was able to get the right facts, which were easily developed because of some of the various investigations that were taking place. And so I think it is probably very helpful to see that particular interview as well, so that you can understand a little bit more on some of the background on these issues. Finally, let me go to the New York Times. David French was out on X talking about this. David French has been in with us on a number of occasions talking about these topics. And as a result, he says, if you want to understand why a nuclear Iran is dangerous, all you need to do is look at the Ukraine war, because he said two things have happened since President Trump's first term that alter the strategic calculus about Iran. Russia invaded Ukraine, and Hamas massacred Israeli civilians. He says the first event taught the world a lesson it shouldn't forget. When a nuclear-armed nation engaged in armed aggression, the rest of the world really doesn't have too many options. He says those options narrow considerably. But by every step, Western powers have worried when they've actually done anything to help Ukraine, what would be the response from a nuclear-armed Russia? He goes on to say, if you want to get another look at that, just think of a nuclear-armed North Korea. And that means that Western powers, as he says, need to contemplate the kind of military actions that they could take, very different than the actions they took against Saddam Hussein in Iraq or Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. And he says, now imagine Iran with even a modest nuclear arsenal, and you can see the potential danger there as well. And so because Iran's military capabilities have been sharply degraded, and because the proxies in Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria have suffered very significant catastrophic military defeats, Iran is weaker than it's been in years. And the other part of that, of course, is the second part he makes, and that is October 7th, 2023, Iran was living with the reality that Hamas is dangerous. And so by, first of all, defeating lots of Hamas, removing a lot of the leadership in Hezbollah, those pagers and cell phones, and now removing a lot of the military armament of Iran, This, I think, has had a very significant blow against the largest country of Middle East terrorism and Middle East sponsor of terrorism. And if nothing else, it brings us back to the July issue of Outlook, in which we have a whole section there on the very significant axis of evil. Didn't you notice that Russia wanted to come and help Iran, and China has actually flown people into the country? So we recognize this axis of evil: North Korea, Russia, China, and Iran. But now one of those is actually very significantly degraded because of the actions over the weekend. Let's take a break. We have some other things to cover besides just what has happened in Iran, and we will do that right after these important messages.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention that one of the many benefits that comes from supporting Point of View is you receive our Outlook magazine. And I mentioned just a minute ago the July issue, which, if it hasn't arrived in your mailbox, will be there very shortly. For those of you watching online, let me hold up one of the articles. And the article there says Foreign Policy and the New Axis of Evil. And if you look at that, you see I have the picture of course, Vladimir Putin Putin, Xi Jinping, and of course Ayatollah Khamenei. And it just illustrates again that we are dealing with dangerous people. We are dealing with a very significant existential threat to America, to the Western world, to democracy. And so that's one of the reasons why these kinds of actions are necessary. And as the editors of the Wall Street Journal said, the president really had no choice, but then added, but of course every other president has decided there was a choice, and that is to kick the can down the road. Well, that did not take place. And as you are finding yourself maybe interacting with individuals sometimes, you will get facts and figures that we want to try to respond to, one of which I could mention real quickly, and that is the other day, Whoopi Goldberg, hardly ever mention her on the air here, but she was on The View, and when at one point they were talking about what it's like to live in Iran, she made the case that African Americans face the same hardships that women and gay people face in Iran. Well, first of all, that is patently false, but you might say, okay, do I have some facts that I could counter that with, because I know people that will watch that and believe that, and how do I respond? And again, you can find this piece, Kayleigh McEnany, you might remember her, she's press secretary for the first Trump administration. They said, well, let's just take one example. Masa Amini, who and she even held up the picture there, who is 22 years of age at the time, did not wear her hijab, was arrested in Iran. She died in a re-education class in prison where she was physically abused by Iranian authorities. So there's one very good illustrative example. But not to be finished with that as well, Kayleigh McEnany then cited a UN report in which, again, the UN may have even downplayed some of this, nevertheless acknowledged that the Iranian government killed about 500 people, detained 200,000 others, including children. The regime has used shotguns, rifles, deliberately shot people in the eyes. They face sexual violence, all sorts of things of that nature. And again, then there was one of the other hosts there at the time was saying, yes, she wouldn't even be allowed to make these comments without wearing a hijab, and then even then would not be allowed to make the comments without facing some kind of retribution. Harris Faulkner, who is also with Fox News, I did not know this, was actually on Star Trek The Next Generation with Whoopi Goldberg. I did not know that. So Harris Faulkner and Whoopi Goldberg were on the same program, but she went on to say, I don't know if she knows the facts here. But that's not to say bad things did not happen previously in this country, Harris Faulkner says. But on Juneteenth, where we recognize the emancipation from slavery, and she does this the day before, and she's just ignorant of the facts. So the bottom line is, sometimes you might run into somebody who is giving you something that might seem like a very unreasonable statement, and you might say, where do I go to find the answer? And I'm hoping that if you subscribe to our Outlook magazine, if you give monthly, you'll receive this, certainly for sure. And then, of course, if you give at the $1 a day, $30 a month or more, which is our Truth Team level, you'll receive also the booklets. And our most recent one was on Sharia law. Some others have been on everything from Buddhism and Hinduism and a variety of other topics. And that's just one of the many benefits of supporting Point of View. And again, you can go to the website and find out more. But let me, if I can, at least cite one other thing that I thought was significant, and that is we had the testimony from the Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, and she was actually in the House Education and Workforce Committee, and she was there for hours. I mean, these testimonies go on and on and on, partially because what you're going to get is partisan digs. You're going to be people making speeches. Hopefully they can use then in their re-election campaign and all the rest. But she stood her ground, and I know there are a lot of people that think we shouldn't have a Department of Education, but I don't think it's going to be disbanded anytime soon. So if we're going to have a Secretary of Education, let's at least have a person with common sense. And so the last article I've posted for you to read goes into some of her comments. She talks about, for example, the need on campus to have free speech and the need need for us to rethink student loans and repayment plans. She talked about the issue of the foreign influence in these various schools. And if you've received our Outlook magazine on that, we've talked about that in some detail. Matter of fact, on the dangers of foreign money and foreign students on campus, she even cited a recent FBI arrest of Chinese nationals that were bringing in a pathological fungi into the University of Michigan, which would be a risk to our safety and security, even our food supply. And so as a result, she was very clear. On a couple occasions where she didn't have an answer, she was quite honest to say, I'll try to get back to the members with a reasonable response. But then she also went on to talk about the shameless capture of colleges and universities by the hard political left, which she said were actually lacking viewpoint diversity, which is a nice way to say virtually almost every professor on campus is a registered Democrat. And even though they supposedly promote diversity, they actually don't have anything of the sort in terms of their hiring decisions. And this article that I've posted for you, written by Teresa Manning, who has written about this issue before, points out that you have certain states, I'll just use Iowa as an example. In the state of Iowa, the state legal code requires that no more than 5 of the 9 members of the Board of Regents belong to a single party. Can't have all Republicans, can't have all Democrats. And so there is within some of the requirements for the state board regents a requirement for, if you will, some kind of political and ideological diversity. And of course, nothing of the sort exists on campus. And I thought that was a really powerful argument as well. And so if nothing else, she went on to talk about some of these other issues, which the higher education system maybe even is need for some reform and some shock. And I thought, if nothing else, since you probably would not have heard this anywhere else except on Point of View, if you are concerned about the state of education, especially the state of higher education in America, I think this article by Teresa Manning would be one that you might want to find, and it's on our website at pointofview.net. We come back, I'm going to be talking for a while with Hal Donaldson. He is the president of Convoy of Hope. John Kasich, when he was on the program recently, identified some people that he had such respect for, and Hal Donaldson was one of those, so we thought we'd get him on briefly to talk about that, and then we'll get back to some of the issues in the news. But as we take a longer break, what a great opportunity for you, first of all, to find these articles. They're very important articles. I've tried to find the ones that I thought were most helpful to you. They're available either in printed form or one's a video that you can pass on to others. We also, of course, have our banner, whereas we have said, as we come to the end of this fiscal year, we certainly need your financial support. And if you appreciate what we're doing, I would certainly appreciate your gift. It could be a one-time gift, but I hope some of you might even consider a monthly gift, because after all, our bills come in monthly. If our support comes in monthly, it matches up pretty well. It's all available at the website, pointofview.net. Click on the button that says Give Now, and we'll be back right after this.
Well, I do need to say that we are running out of time to raise funds by June 30th, the deadline that will determine our budget for the next fiscal year. Your gift will make a difference. And thanks to an ongoing matching challenge, your gift will be doubled through the month of June. Here's why Point of View is the media ministry to support as we forge into the future. Point of View is trustworthy, with proven dedication to a biblical worldview for 53 years and counting. Additionally, Point of View is making a multi-generational impact. Your support equips listeners to articulate biblical truth about the issues of our day with their children and even their grandchildren. Americans need a proven resource to equip current and future generations to live out God's truth in our time. Give it to them today by giving at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I do appreciate Point of View and what you folks are doing. You really are doing a great job to educate and to help Christian folks do a better job to honor Christ in all that we do.
My husband and I are your supporters. We just really appreciate the show and the people you bring on.
I just want to commend you guys on your program. I love listening to you.
It's a blessing. Been listening to you for several years. Your program has helped my family see current events and elections and politics through the eyes and the principles of Scripture. And that's been enlightening, and we're trying to pass that on to others.
I want to say, first of all, that I really enjoyed the Millennial Roundtable, and I love the program altogether. I think Kerby is great, and I really appreciate all of y'all, all that y'all do, and the truth that y'all put out.
Hey, great show. Love all your comments and what you're talking about.
Thanks again for what you do.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
You might remember when we did an interview a while back with John Kasich that he identified some people that he really had great respect for. One of those individuals is the individual we're going to be talking about right now. He's the president of Convoy of Hope. At the time, I pointed out the fact that almost every year when I'm going to speak at the Kennecott Institute, I take that cutoff and go right by the Convoy of Hope, and have certainly been very impressed with the ministry that they have, and was learning even more about Hal Donaldson, and we thought it would be great for you to learn about him as well, especially since he has this new book, What Really Matters: How to Care for Yourself and Serve a Hurting World. He is the president of Convoy of Hope. This is an organization that has been providing supplies and resources, warm meals, groceries, medical and dental screenings, opportunities, business, all sorts of things like that, rated very high by Charity Navigator. He is the recipient of the National Distinguished Service in Social Welfare Award. He's the author of more than 30 books, including Midnight in the City, including this particular one, What Really Matters. He's a graduate in journalism from San Jose State University and has a bachelor's degree as well in biblical studies from Bethany University, and joins us now by phone. So, Hal, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, thank you, Kerby. It's great to be with you.
I appreciate the work that you do. I've had such high respect. But then I open up your book and find out your family background and a car accident that killed your father and really ruined the health of your mother had such a devastating impact on you, and maybe is key to your, really, if you will, empathy and desire to reach out to the poor. Can you share that?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. One is I truly did experience the shame and the pain of poverty, living on food stamps, having holes in your shoes, not being able to go to school with a sack lunch in your hand. So I know what that's like. But I also experienced the power of kindness. And I didn't choose a life of bitterness in large part because people from a local church, they wrapped their arms around me, and they showed me love. They told me that God had a plan for my life. And even though I was wrestling with a lot of insecurities and a lot of questions, I didn't understand how a loving God could take a father away from 4 kids, and a lot of questions like that. It was their kindness that helped me choose Jesus, a life of following Jesus versus a life of bitterness.
One of the things that I thought was kind of interesting, you have a background in journalism, and yet you were the editor-in-chief of the magazine for the Assembly of God Fellowship. And so I think a lot of people would love to know how you ended up in this line of work, given the fact it looked like you were going to be a journalist and an editor for the rest of your life.
Yeah, so did I. Yeah, I was on that track for sure. As the editor of that magazine, which had a very large circulation, I traveled the world. I had the opportunity to hit every continent, 90 countries, and I saw firsthand the need. I was exposed to the need. And I also saw places where the church was having a huge difference in really arresting poverty, helping people escape poverty. But also I saw just the masses of people that were being mobilized. And the thought occurred to me, maybe this is something I need to do. And it really goes back to a story I was writing for some missionaries in Calcutta When I landed, they told me that they wanted me to interview Mother Teresa for their book. And in the course of that conversation, she just turned the tables on me. She said, "Young man, let me ask you, what are you doing? What are you doing to help the poor and the suffering?" And I figured it's probably not a good idea to lie to Mother Teresa. So I told her the truth. I said, "I'm really not doing much of anything." And she said, "Well, everyone can do something. Just do the next kind thing that God puts in front of you." And so the rest of the story is I came back to the States. I felt compelled to do something quite unusual. I felt compelled to travel to 8 cities and to live in the streets for 3 days and 3 nights. I went to Miami, Atlanta, Chicago, D.C., New York, major cities, rode with the police on the midnight shift, walked the streets with a hidden tape recorder, interviewing drug addicts, gang members, prostitutes, runaways, the homeless. And, I feel like God had to do a work in my heart before he could do a work through my hands. And I came back after those trips, and I loaded up a pickup truck 30 years ago with $300 worth of groceries and started passing them out to migrant farm workers in Northern California, where I was living at the time.
Yes.
And that was the start of Convoy of Hope.
Oh, just amazing. Now, one of the things I do want to get into, and that gets back to the title of the book, What Really Matters, because early on, again, I appreciate your vulnerability. You talk about the fact that while you were traveling and serving disaster survivors and helping impoverished families, you missed band concerts, soccer games, things of that nature. And that vulnerability then shows up later when you really talk about the need for what you might call a change survey. How much time are you spending with Jesus? How much time are you spending with your family? And that really caused you to reevaluate your sleep, your weekend speaking engagements, dinner appointments, and those kinds of things. And in some respects, that really is one of the major themes of your book, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. At age 50, I found myself lying in a hospital bed with heart issues, and which really got my attention. And lying in that hospital bed, I came to this realization that I was traveling the world. We were feeding lots of people. We were helping lots of people. But I was chasing need. My focus was on need rather than just living in obedience. And I began reading the Gospels, and it became very clear to me that Jesus didn't meet the needs of everyone that he encountered. He didn't feed everyone. He didn't heal everyone. He did what his Father in heaven asked him to do. And I can say this to you, Kerby. I'm sure that there are many really good missions that I took to places like Afghanistan and the Philippines, all over the world, meeting needs. But I may not have been there in the will of God. I may not have been living in obedience as opposed to just trying to respond to need. And I think the older I've become, the more I realize how important prayer is to the kind of work that we do. We are bombarded with requests, opportunities,
I can imagine.
And it's just imperative that you just hear from God.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, I want to get into some more of those details. But again, giving a suggestion about making sleep more consistent and reevaluating your speaking commitments, and also making sure that you go to the doctor and have reassigned some of your projects and nightly walks with your wife and on and on. But also, I do want to get into not only what you've done to change, but how you've sought out many of those core values that are very important in the Convoy of Hope, and then also just a whole series of maybe looking at some of the sources of stress. Yesterday, interesting enough, I was teaching through James 3, talking about the tongue, and I then at the end talked about difficult people, and that's one of the things you're talking about, weariness, fear, anger, and all the rest. And so this book, whether you are working in a ministry like Convoy of Hope or just trying to figure out maybe what you need to be doing so that you're in the will of God, is a book I would recommend. What Really Matters, How to Care for Yourself and Serve a Hurting World. It is published by our good friends at Baker Books. It is written by Hal Donaldson, and it has got a virtual who's who of individuals that have endorsed the book. Let's take a break, and we'll come back a little bit more with some of the insights from Hal Donaldson right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Freedom in this country depends on three important foundations: morality, limits, and human rights. First, freedom depends on morality. John Adams observed, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." When the citizens have an internal moral compass, the size and scope of government can be small. There's no need for external laws and regulations from government. If people do what is right and demonstrate common sense, the republic will thrive. Second, freedom also depends on limits. Lord Acton famously explained, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." That is why the framers instituted checks and balances in our constitutional system. They also recognized the rights of citizens to hold government officials accountable. A moral people keep the government in check. A limited government keeps political leaders in check. A third foundation of freedom depends on respecting human rights as granted by our Creator. That important principle is found in the Declaration of Independence, which explains the why of American government. And it is also implied in the Constitution, which explains the how of American government. And this country has not always lived up to those ideals, but they provided a worthy goal to achieve. Although you may know all these foundational principles, I fear that a whole generation of young people do not know them because they were never taught in their civics classes. And I see each of these foundational principles slipping away. If we don't begin to teach these principles to our children and grandchildren, then morality, limited government, and respect for human rights will soon become relics of our past. That is why we need you to teach them to your family today. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us for a few more minutes Hal Donaldson. Again, he is the author of this book, What Really Matters, but probably best known as the president of Convoy of Hope. Just an incredible ministry that you need to find out more about. And of course, we have a link so that you can find out more about the convoyofhope.org. And I would encourage you to support them as well. And also, you can find out more about the book. You probably can find it in your local bookstore, but if you can't, there is a way in which you can find it both in paperback and Kindle, and I think you will really appreciate that as well. So lots of great material that is available. And I just thought for just a minute, Hal, one of the things that you are talking about in the book is kind of some people get stuck, and I would imagine you were there as well. Ephesians 4 verse 27 says, "Do not give the devil a foothold." And you say a foothold is where a situation where somebody's obtained power, influence. And so you talk about the need to maybe recognize that if a devil has a foothold, you need to figure out how to resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Of course, I've been teaching through James right now, but also to have people praying for you, to maybe even have a specific list and things of that nature, because in some respects, what we're talking about is the need for people who are stuck to get unstuck and thus be able to do the will of God.
Oh, so true. And, I wrote the book because Convoy had really experienced meteoric growth. I think on the Forbes list, we're like the 27th largest in the United States out of 2 million. And so what was happening, I was getting a lot of calls from leaders, business leaders, as well as pastors, church leaders, saying, well, how did this happen? How did you do it? What are some of the organizational things you need to do? And my response was, well, you as a leader, you need to make sure that your heart is healthy. that you as a person are healthy. And they would say, well, we get that, but, you know, what? And I would explain that the heart is the foundation that God builds upon. If, as the leader, your heart is healthy, if you're in a good place, then what you're doing is you're giving God a foundation, a larger foundation that he can build something on. And so I would share that, and they would say, yeah, I get that, but what are some of the organizational adjustments? And so I just figured, you know what, I'm just going to put it in a book. So now when people call, I just send them a book. And that's really what we did. But, you know, I just believe that success is more dangerous than failure. It is, because success can lead to self-reliance. And I know for us at Convoy, I think when I got my life in a better place and I became, I would say, healthier, we began to see unbelievable growth.
Yes.
But it begins with a leader, the pastor, the business leader being healthy.
Well, again, one of the things I want to pass on to individuals that may be in a ministry, in a business, maybe they're elders, deacons, whatever, you actually sat down and stated your objectives and principles, you know, whether it's love and dignity and service and excellence and integrity and unity and support and partnership, hope and advocacy. Those are just a few that you have listed there. And it does seem to me that that's helpful as well. We all have a mission statement. We all sort of think we know where we're going, but I think those core values are very important as well as an organizational structure, don't you think?
They do. And, you know, they have to move from paper to real life. And for us, those core values, I would say they manifest themselves in doing what we say we're going to do, under-promising, over-delivering, and just operating at the highest level of integrity. And I think, you know, that's how it's really played out for us. Those core values have taken this organization a long ways.
I think so. One other one I did mention was the issue of stress. You know, you talk about the fact that you can reduce stress by getting real and speaking life and forgive yourself. But I thought one of the very helpful charts was where you have the source of stress on the left-hand side. Let's just pick difficult people. And then you have God's promise, you know, about the idea of love your neighbor and hate your enemy. No, we should love everyone and all the issues that are associated with that in Matthew 5. Limited resources, you know, Philippians 4, my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of the glory of Christ Jesus. Weariness, fear, anger, regret. It does seem to me that you have taken the time to say, okay, what are the stressors in my life? And others need to evaluate what are the stressors in your life as a young mother, as a entrepreneur, as a successful person in the business world, a successful person in ministry, and then begin to sort those out as well. And that was another key to your success, I think, as well.
It was, and I think, you know, being intentional and writing out, okay, these are the things that are causing me stress, but this is what I'm going to do about it. And I'll just give you three things that I did that are extremely practical. And as you know, the book is just filled with practical tips on how to remove stress from your life and to live in obedience to Christ. But I used to do breakfast, lunch, and dinner meetings religiously. And I cut out dinner meetings because I began to give that back as an offering to my wife and to my children. I began to make vacations sacred. We would, at the beginning of the year, we would schedule a vacation and our vacation time, and there was nothing that would get in the way. I remember one time being invited to the Oval Office with some other leaders, and I turned them down. Why? Because my family was more important. Another rule that I use to this day is my 8 p.m. rule. And at 8 p.m., Kerby, you're not going to see me or hear me dealing with difficult issues.
Wow.
Because here's the reason. If you're thinking about it at 8 o'clock, you're probably going to be thinking about 10, and you're going to be lying awake at 1 or 2 in the morning trying to figure it out.
Right.
And so an alarm goes off for me at 8 o'clock, and where I really turn my attention to my family and to God. And it was things like that I think helped me find a place of greater health.
Again, you have disciplined myself not to entertain weighty topics after 8 p.m., reduce time spent on email and my phone after dinner, review my calendar for the next day before dinner. Or, you go through those long lists. But I thought I'd pick one other one, and then we'll let you go. And that is, you talk also about having this inner circle of friends, kind of like a personal board of directors. And again, you have this hard copy you keep in your briefcase. But you're looking for people that are loyal, prayerful, trustworthy, biblical, confidential, resourceful, strategic, generous, compassionate, kingdom-minded, available. It does seem to me that, again, there is a wisdom with many counselors, as we are told in Scripture. But again, picking the right inner circle, very important for your success as well, isn't it?
It really is, because we're surrounded by givers or takers. And I think as I really began to analyze my life, what was happening as my energy was being siphoned off by people who weren't giving a lot in return. And I believe that Scripture makes it very clear that we all have a hedge of protection around us. We think in terms of angels, but I also think in terms of people. People can help be a part of that hedge that protect us. And I think when I made some of those changes, it helped me, again, find greater health.
Let me just mention that one of the reasons I wanted to do this is just to feature you because of John Kasich's comments. And, of course, I've been familiar with the Convoy of Hope, but also wanted to let listeners know that they can be supportive of you. And so we have a link to convoyofhope.org. There's a place where you can find out more about your kindness can change the world, and certainly learn a little bit more about the people that you've helped, the volunteers you've engaged, in the way in which people can get involved with you as well. So again, that website is there available. But let me also mention that this book is out, and it is entitled What Really Matters: How to Care for Yourself and to Serve a Hurting World. Just a veritable who's who of individuals: Greg Groeschel, Jenny Allen, Chris Tomlin, Sammy Rodriguez, all sorts of people have been on the program with us, Ben Roethlisberger, Kathy Ireland, on, just all sorts of individuals that you would know. And so the book is out. It is published by Baker, and you should be able to find it in your local bookstore. And if you can't, we'll certainly provide information about that on our website at pointofview.net. So, Hal, thank you for joining us. You came highly recommended by so many individuals, and it's a privilege to have you on the program with us today here on Point of View.
Kerby, thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on the show, the radio show, and you just do an excellent job. Really impressive.
Let's see if we can take a break. And when we come back, I wanted to get back into some issues in the news, but also thought, let's bring in some of the people behind the scenes who actually are in charge of Point of View, because after all, we are coming to the end of our fiscal year. And I have said before, I want you to support your church. I certainly want you to support a radio station that carries this program if it's one that's non-commercial and depends on your financial donations, or else support the advertisers, whatever that might be, so that you can help them. But I hope that you will consider what you might do to support this ministry as well. Lots of great material that we've posted on the website at pointofview.net. But we need to take a break. We'll come back and give you a little bit of an update on how we're doing as we come to year end. All that coming up right after this.
Well, I do need to say that we are running out of time to raise funds by June 30th, the deadline that will determine our budget for the next fiscal year. Your gift will make a difference. And thanks to an ongoing matching challenge, your gift will be doubled through the month of June. Here's why Point of View is the media ministry to support as we forge into the future. Point of View is trustworthy, with proven dedication to a biblical worldview for 53 years and counting. Additionally, Point of View is making a multi-generational impact. Your support equips listeners to articulate biblical truth about the issues of our day with their children and even their grandchildren. Americans need a proven resource to equip current and future generations to live out God's truth in our time. Give it to them today by giving at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, let me just mention that tomorrow we have Kevin Lehman with us, and we'll be talking about his new book, and then we'll certainly be getting back into the issues in the news. I might just mention Wednesday we have Gary Frazier, and we'll certainly be talking about the Middle East. Next Monday we have Gary Bauer. We'll certainly be talking about the Middle East and a variety of other things. So all through the week we'll be talking about very important issues. But I thought for just a minute we might bring in the president and vice president of Point of View. Warren Kelly is the president. Jana Weidler is the vice president of stewardship. And Warren, first of all, this is our last week before the end of the fiscal year,
yes,
which I've said in some respects is more important than even December 31st, because once we end this fiscal year, we have the summer to kind of figure out where we are, to put together a budget. This is a very important time for fundraising.
It is a very, very important time for fundraising, and we have a goal. We need to hit $150,000 before the end of the fiscal year. And as Kerby mentioned, we're just a week away from that. So far, we have $60,000 that's come in toward that. So we need another $90,000 before the end of the year. And did I mention that we're only a week away from the end of the fiscal year?
Well, Jana, you are the one that has pulled together some of this giving that has taken place. So has Warren. And in some respects, you get a chance to meet these donors.
I
and
do.
You just love these donors, don't you?
What a privilege it is to be able to visit with them and share some food and fellowship and get to know about their lives, their family, how they first learned about Point of View. We just got a gift in from our friend in El Campo, Texas, of $500, and then a couple in Wolcottville, Indiana, just gave us a gift of $2,500. So we are really happy that these gifts are coming in, that we are supported by our partners, but as we go on, you can show us how much you value Point of View and learning truth and having the biblical views given to you by all the different issues going on in the world today. But you can help us by calling in right now and giving towards our fiscal year end. It is such an important time for us, like Warren had mentioned. I met a couple of days ago with somebody from Tyler, Texas, who has been listening to Point of View since Marlon Maddox was still on the air, and they have never given a gift. So if you are in that category that you have been listening to Point of View and you have never called in with your gift, please do so now.
Warren, I got to come back to you because I know your story. You got to tell it one more time here, because you've met with people who you've talked to who've never given to Point of View.
I have. I've had several meetings like that with people that I knew from other sources that they had listened to Point of View for many years. Some of them have had a profound impact. The show had a profound impact on their lives, changed the whole direction and course of their lives, and yet they'd never given. And I have struggled with that for years and trying to figure out why it is that people don't give when they know that there's a need. So I booked lunch and sat down, and every single time I'd ask the question, says, I'm not trying to, put you on the spot here, but I know Point of View is important to you. He goes, oh, yeah. And I know you care about the show. Oh, yes, very much so. And says, but you've never given to support the show. Can you tell me why? And I get this deer in headlights look every single time. And it's just, I never thought about it.
Yes.
So if you've never thought about it, now's a good time to think about it. Yes. So as Jenna said, we would appreciate you if you would call. It's 1-800-347-5151.
I might just mention, too, I'm holding up this for those of you that are watching online, but it is our latest issue of Outlook. And Jana, you talked about our partners, because we really do see them as partners, and they value the Outlook magazine. They value those booklets, and you've heard that time and time again, haven't you?
I have, pretty much from everybody I meet with. Those booklets are such an incredible tool to give out, especially for younger people, the college and career age and the teens. If you belong to a church and you are in charge of a group such, the college and career or the youth group, this is a great way for them to learn about what's going on in the world from a biblical view. And a lot of people think that they have a biblical view, and they are proven wrong over and over and over. So this show is such a valuable asset to those that are seeking God, seeking His will, and seeking the truth.
Well, again, we don't necessarily claim to be a prophet, but here the latest issue that is arriving in everybody's inbox, either certainly, if they get it by digital or if they certainly get it in their mailbox, is the one on this axis of evil. The latest booklet, Warren, is on Sharia law.
Yep.
So you can kind of see that we certainly try to be timely. And Janet, you've run into that as well. There are people that will sometimes say, do you have a booklet on? I remember one time we were actually in Peoria, and that was one of the questions. Do you have a booklet on Hinduism? I said, no, but we will have one. And there it is, right there next to me. And so you can see that in some respects, we do see you as a partner because you give us ideas. Even today, I was responding to an email from somebody asking a very good question. And Warren, that's another ministry off air that we do in addition to all the broadcast every day.
It is. There's so many resources that are available through Point of View. If you visit the website, Kerby's putting at least half a dozen new articles on the website every single day that relate to the topics that he's talking about. So that gives you resources that if you want to share something with somebody and you don't remember exactly what he said, a lot of times you can find the information in the resources that we put on the website, make those available. But again, the resources, when you give, are so valuable. The booklets, the Outlook magazine, the different things that we're sending out. So we do appreciate your support, and we want to be partners with you in reaching your community as you partner with us in your financial support.
One other one I thought we'd mention is somebody that sits in this chair occasionally and certainly sits over there is Liberty. And she has been doing a podcast for some time, which we actually are sort of bringing under the umbrella of Point of View. Can you explain that for a minute?
Yes, we started it kind of under the umbrella of Point of View, and then we moved it separate on the advice of legal counsel to protect some things that we were doing online. But because of the things that have changed in the culture, it's now makes more sense to bring it back under the umbrella. So Liberty has the Know Why podcast. You can see it at knowwhypodcast.com. It's a great, shorter piece that's geared toward a millennial demographic. She does a great job with that. That's one of the things that we're doing to reach that younger demographic. But Liberty is also helping more and more with the show and giving us a younger voice here. So there's a lot of things that we're doing looking ahead to the future. But to continue those things, we do need your help.
Might just mention one other one. If you look down on the website there, we have Pray for America. We certainly do that. And we also have the Point of View highlights because Megan has taken some of this great material and put it in a shorter format. And I run into, sometimes, Jana, you run into young people as well say, I'm not sure I can listen to a 2-hour program, but if you can give me the highlights of the interview you did with Dinesh D'Souza or Max Lucado or Eric Metaxas, I'd be glad to listen to that.
That's correct. And a lot of people, a lot of young people listen from their phones. They don't have radios anymore. They don't listen to it in their car. These highlights that Megan put together it's like you talk about the Cliff Notes, and it's easier for the young people to be able to hear that, absorb it, and have a solid impression and opinion about what's going on.
And if they have a cell phone, maybe we should have an app on the cell phone. What do you think?
We are working on that. We have found that the total to update our website to support a new phone app, and if you're using the old phone app, you're probably having problems with it. But we talked to somebody and came up with the $65,000 price tag for that, of which we have already raised $20,000 from 2 of our partners. So that's something else to look into. If you are in a position to give, please be blessed by giving and bless us by your gifts.
Warren, that's kind of like, and there's more. A lot of times people say, I'm just responding to and supporting a 2-hour broadcast. No, there's a whole lot more behind the scenes.
There's a whole lot more. And there's something that I haven't had a chance to even share this with you. I was talking to one of our board members last week, and she made the comment, says, Kerby has all of these different organizations on the show and talks to them, helps promote their organizations, help them with their fundraising for their organizations. So when you're giving to Point of View, you're literally giving to help hundreds of different organizations across the country and broadening that impact in that way. So there is, like you said, so much more than just the radio program that you're accomplishing when you give.
Let's just mention before I let you guys go, because I know you'll be getting the phone calls. First of all, Warren, you mentioned the number 800
800-347-5151. And I suspect it'll get pretty busy near the end of the week, which is why I'm bringing in family members to answer the phones there as well. 800-347-5151. But now we have, it says Anchor to Truth, 56,000. Now it's up to 60,000 because of what Jan has done. So now we're up to $60,000 match, and it's a dollar for dollar match. So if you said, I would love to make sure that my money, my donation, my gift is matched, now's the time to do so. So again, 1-800-347-5151. And of course, the website's pointofview.net. So Jan, I know you'll be talking to people on the phone, praying with people, and answering those phone calls. So Warren, thank you for being with us today for just a short time. And we will take a break, come back and get into just a few other issues in the news. But don't forget, we have Kevin Lehman tomorrow. That'll be a lot of fun. And we have all sorts of other guests all through the week, and ending up with Penna Dexter and Kelly Shackelford. Let's take a break. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for just a few more minutes. Let me again mention that we'll have Kevin Lehman with us tomorrow. We'll have Gary Frazier on Wednesday. I'm looking forward to, of course, the Friday weekend edition with Penna Dexter and Kelly Shackelford, who, by the way, is on the way to Washington, D.C. again, but he said he's coming back Thursday night so he can be with us on Friday. And then Monday we have Gary Bauer. So you can see we've got a loaded lineup, and certainly there are a lot of different topics we address. I got to tell a funny story. One time we had a guest in studio, and before the program starts, there's a piece that we play oftentimes, and people that on the internet can hear it. You maybe don't hear it on your radio program, but I go through all the different topics we list. And he said, boy, that's an incredible list. And then my response is, yeah, and sometimes we cover that many topics or a good portion of those topics in 2 hours, because we certainly have today talked about what is happening in Iran and Israel. We've talked about, of course, the Convoy of Hope. Talked just a little bit with Warren Kelly and Jana Weidler about Point of View. And here, my commentary today is about freedom's foundations, and tomorrow is on historical ignorance. And I thought I'd just mention that briefly, because that's another thing that we like to do here on Point of View, and that is we recognize that we have not done a good job of teaching our children and grandchildren the American history, and certainly the reason for the founding of this country. And there certainly is a lot of evidence of God's providence in history, and you've heard us oftentimes talk about that and interview guests on that. And so I thought it would be worth mentioning that today's commentary is called Freedom's Foundation, and I point out that really freedom in this country is based upon really 3 important foundations: morality, limits, and human rights. Morality, well, that one's pretty simple, because if you go to the website today, you will see that Karen has posted a quote from John Adams, who said, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." We talked about that, interestingly enough, with Kelly Shackelford and Dr. Merrill Matthews on Friday, because when people have an internal moral compass, the size and scope of government can be small. But when you no longer have a basis for morality and everybody does what they think is right, you can't even have enough police officers on every street corner to actually deal with what happens when human sinfulness takes off. So the first part of freedom is morality. The second is limits. Lord Acton famously said, "Power tends to corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely." That's why the framers of the Constitution had checks and balances on our constitutional system. It recognized that human beings have rights, and moral people will keep the government in check, but also a limited government will keep the political leaders in check. So morality, number 2, limits, number 3, human rights. That one also is very important, because if you want to understand our government, you need to recognize that the Declaration of Independence really gives us the why of American government, and the Constitution explains the how of American government, which also, I think, explains, some people say, well, I don't see God in the Constitution. First of all, I think you can see some implications there. Okay, but I'll admit that, because it's really answering the how question. But the why question, if you want to make a distinction, with a church may have a doctrinal statement which will tell you the why, what we believe, and then you might have church governance that tells you the how. It may not even mention God there, but it doesn't mean the church doesn't believe in God. This is the same kind of thing. Now, we'll first of all have to admit that the country hasn't always lived up to those ideals, but it was a worthy goal to achieve. And so again, if you see that these foundational principles are important, that's why we need to teach them to our children and our grandchildren. Otherwise, that's going to be slipping away, which sets me up for the commentary you will see posted tomorrow. But I'll give you a preview. It's called Historical Ignorance. And that is, we have all sorts of studies that have shown that most Americans, even if they've gone to college, do not understand our history and our structure of government. One example I give is from Tim Gagline, who's been on the program with us, served at one time as special assistant to President Bush, now writes columns that you can read. And he talked about a study of about 2,500 Americans and found that only half of the adults could even name the 3 branches of government. Oh, goodness. I'm getting heartburn already. Only a third, about 36% of college graduates could do so. And interestingly enough, 18% of the students tested
could not name a single right or freedom guaranteed under the First Amendment. This is pretty bad. Well, you say, well, but we must have done better at our elite universities. And of course, you would know that's not the case because let's take Harvard. Even there, Harvard is a prestigious school. It has been one, but they found that even on the test, Harvard graduates scored 69%. Most of us would consider that to be what? A D plus, a failing grade. And so there are all sorts of evidence of the fact that we have work to do. Well, that's one of the things we really want to do here on Point of View is educate you about Americans' history, and we certainly want to do that. But also recognize that maybe you aren't getting all the facts. The other day, I rattled off just a few. For example, in the month of May, now we're coming to the end of June, but in the month of May, we actually, in this country, created 139,000 new jobs. That beat expectations for the third month in a row. So you can see that there's always an estimate on how many jobs will be created. We've exceeded that 3 months in a row. And you probably won't be hearing that in too many examples of legacy media, but you heard it here on Point of View. We also have talked about tariffs. Again, we're not real thrilled with the tariffs that Donald Trump has tried to implement. They've been on again, off again. But even so, the tariffs have reduced the budget deficit, according to the Congressional Budget Office, by $2.8 trillion. And if you remember a couple of months ago, the big issue was the price of eggs. And I just found this on National Egg Day. Yes, there is such a thing as a National Egg Day. They calculated that egg prices were down 61% since Trump took office. And, of course, we've talked about the military and how the U.S. Army met its fiscal recruiting goals 4 months early. And, of course, some of the reason for that celebration of 250 years of the U.S. Army was because it might encourage more young people to consider joining the U.S. military. So there are a lot of really important principles there. And while we're talking about the military, as we started the program today, let's at least applaud the military for a job well done. We were talking about off air. Oftentimes, no matter what happens, Trump is wrong. But this time, even the media had to say, looks like a job well done. They were able to get in, bomb, get out, and no loss of life. Not a hair on the head of any one of those individuals was harmed. And yet we are also seeing that there are other actions being taken by Israel. And perhaps the Middle East will be more of a safe place than it's been in the past. We'll find that out, and that's why we'll continue to talk about this all through the week. If you find yourself saying, I'd like to find some of those articles, look for them at the website, pointofview.net. Think about clicking on that button that says Give Now, and now we have a matching challenge up to $60,000. A lot of good work. First of all, I want to thank Megan. Glad to have her back engineering the program. Steve, thank you for producing the program. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Well, I do need to say that we are running out of time to raise funds by June 30th, the deadline that will determine our budget for the next fiscal year. Your gift will make a difference. And thanks to an ongoing matching challenge, your gift will be doubled through the month of June. Here's why Point of View is the media ministry to support as we forge into the future. Point of View is trustworthy, with proven dedication to a biblical worldview for 53 years and counting. Additionally, Point of View is making a multi-generational impact. Your support equips listeners to articulate biblical truth about the issues of our day with their children and even their grandchildren. Americans need a proven resource to equip current and future generations to live out God's truth in our time. Give it to them today by giving at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.